Welcome to B2 Listening Practice. This podcast helps you improve your English naturally with everyday topics, real-life situations, and useful vocabulary at B2 level. Join us today for a powerful episode as we explore the personal stories and deep reflections of missionaries and climate justice advocates like Father Sean, Sorcha, and Emma from Trócaire. From the rainforests of the Philippines to the dry lands of East Africa, they share their experiences with climate change, the destruction of ecosystems, and the urgent call for ethical responsibility. Now let's start. I met Sean on a really warm, sunny day up in Navan, where he is based with the Colombans, and I started by asking him to describe his early life and what brought him to the Philippines as a missionary.
I went to Mindanao, Philippines. I learned the Cebuano language and culture for a year, then worked in a local church. In 1971, martial law started under Marcos. People were jailed for having different ideas. I got involved in social justice. Many people suffered. Some were jailed just for teaching students to think. I saw beautiful rainforests on one side and destroyed land on the other, like a dry, lifeless desert. It shocked me. I looked at Catholic teachings, but found nothing about protecting nature. That's when I started my journey. I was angry and upset.
Sean's work with the Taboli people in the Philippines shaped his path toward speaking out on climate change and sustainability.
I worked with the Taboli, a mountain tribe. I saw how badly the forests were destroyed over 30 years. This hurt the land and the people. I realized we, as humans, are not alone. Many other species share this world. They are like family, and we should respect their lives. This is a new way of thinking in the Catholic Church. Pope Francis's letter Laudato Si speaks about this, but it will take time for people to truly understand.
Laudato Si is a letter from the Pope asking everyone, not just Catholics, to care for our planet.
About 30% of climate change comes from transport, cars, trucks, planes, all using coal, oil, and gas. These fuels are cheap, but pollute the air and harm health. In cities in China, the air can be very toxic. The good news is that clean energy like solar and wind is now almost as cheap as fossil fuels. That's a big deal. Even some car companies like Volvo are now making electric cars instead of only petrol ones. So change is happening.
Sean mentioned Volvo, the car company, which said that from 2019, all new cars would be electric or part electric. This helps meet EU rules to cut carbon emissions. Using fewer fossil fuels like coal and oil is key to fighting climate change. Trócaire supports a global movement called divestment, which asks people and governments to stop investing in fossil fuel companies. I asked Emma from Trócaire to explain this.
Divestment means pulling money out of fossil fuel businesses like coal, oil, and gas. These are the main cause of climate change. We want money to go into clean energy instead. Our goal is to make the Irish government stop investing public money in polluting companies. So far, we've had good progress, but we still need to keep pushing for full change.
Sean believes Ireland isn't doing enough.
Ireland thinks it's helping poor countries. But when it comes to climate change, we're actually doing a lot of damage. We eat too much meat and our habits harm the planet. Years ago, if I asked for money to plant trees, people would laugh. But now, views have changed. Climate change is one of the biggest problems we face, scientifically, morally, and economically. NGOs like Trócaire now understand this and are helping spread the message.
Trócaire wasn't always focused on climate change. I asked Sorcha, who works in Africa, to explain how the organization's view shifted.
I joined Trócaire in the late 1990s. Before that, I was working in Africa. Back then, most of our work focused on food, especially helping countries in Africa grow enough to eat. In the 1980s, there were huge famines in Ethiopia and South Sudan. These were caused by war and drought. That was the first time the world really saw climate-related crises on TV. People had to move because the rains didn't come and crops failed.
Back then, people talked about droughts and food shortages. Were they talking about climate change as a global issue?
Not really. I remember when the UN officially confirmed climate change, I laughed a little because farmers in Africa, Latin America, and the US had already been noticing weird weather for years. In 1998, I was in Honduras. Usually, hurricanes came in late October, but that year they started in August. The rainy season changed completely. Farmers said, the rains don't come when they should anymore. So we started small irrigation projects to help them water their crops. Before that, irrigation was only for big farms. But we had to accept that drought was becoming normal. Even in Ireland, in the late 1990s and 2000s, we saw more floods and strange weather. These extreme weather events showed us something was wrong. Scientists needed time to gather proof, but communities had been living with these changes for a long time.
When did Trócaire begin to see climate change as a serious issue?
It became clear when climate change wasn't just happening in a few places, it was everywhere. We saw it in Africa, Latin America, every year. And we started to see a connection between our lifestyle, how much we consume, and our carbon emissions, and the struggles people face in poor countries. In the villages where we work, people consume very little, yet they suffer the most. That's when we realized climate change is a justice issue. Our way of living is hurting others. As an organization, we understood we couldn't stay silent. We had to speak up and take responsibility.
As Sean, Sorcha, and Emma explained, it took time for groups like Trócaire to understand how climate change affects development. But now the message is clear. Climate change hurts people, especially the poor, and it's getting worse. I asked Sean to talk about one of the biggest issues we face: water. As Sean mentioned earlier, we can't ignore the serious damage climate change is causing in poorer parts of the world. Right now, East Africa is in crisis, and it's affecting many of the countries where Trócaire works. I asked Sorcha why this is happening.
This year, the crisis in East Africa, places like Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, is very serious. Many people there live nomadic lives, moving with their animals to find water. But now, the water is gone. When your whole life depends on moving your herds to water and there is none, everything collapses. Your income, your culture, your way of life. People are losing animals, and crops are failing again and again. I've seen the same thing in Malawi. Families lose their harvest and can't afford to send their kids to school. They sell whatever they can, goats, belongings, or borrow money to buy food. This creates a cycle of poverty that lasts for years. It's not just one bad season, it affects people long term.
What Sorcha is really pointing to, and what all our speakers have said, is that we must change how we relate to the natural world. Sean explains how climate change is also pushing many animal species toward extinction, and why that matters.
Climate change is causing a massive loss of species, the sixth mass extinction in Earth's history. In 2004, scientist Chris Thomas warned that up to 1 million species could disappear in the next 50 years because their habitats are changing too fast for them to adapt. This matters because we're part of nature, not separate from it. Sadly, many religious teachings in the past made it seem like humans were above or apart from the rest of creation. But biology shows otherwise. We share most of our DNA with animals like mice and rats. We're connected to all life.
Sean highlights an important point, that humans have harmed the environment partly because we see ourselves as separate from nature. He believes we need to change this mindset and recognize that we are part of creation and depend on it. I spoke with Colm Hogan from Trócaire's church team about this shift in thinking.
Traditionally, the church taught that God gave humans dominion over the world. But recently, especially after Laudato Si, there's a growing view that we coexist with creation and have a responsibility to care for it. Pope Francis asks what we will leave for future generations. Father Sean's experience in the Philippines shows that real change happens when people see firsthand how their actions affect others and the environment, making the transformation powerful.
We rely on the planet for food and medicine, yet we're losing vital species. Scientists are racing to study plants before they go extinct. In harming nature, we are ultimately harming ourselves.
Logic suggests that knowing our survival depends on nature. We would protect it. But that's not always true. Education plays a role, but as Sean says, people aren't taught enough about this. I spoke to Elisha Kelly from Trócaire's development education team about education's role.
It's not a lack of education, but how we educate. Schools focus on the science of climate change and blame, which is necessary. But if children learn to love and appreciate nature early on, not just as a resource, but as a source of joy, they might choose to protect it. At Trócaire, we teach young people not just the facts, but also the social justice impacts of climate change, encouraging them to act and raise their voices for change. I've met many young people who believe they can be the positive change the planet needs.
Everyone I spoke to for this podcast shared a strong sense of urgency about climate change and its future impact. I asked Sean what we need to change how we tackle climate change and our relationship with nature.
We need movement, mitigation, and policies to reduce carbon emissions. We also need significant funding for countries already suffering from climate change and new technologies to help us move beyond fossil fuels. Experts warn we must leave 80% of fossil fuels in the ground to keep global warming under 2 degrees Celsius.
That means 80% of fossil fuels must stay underground. A huge amount. I asked Emma to explain this further.
To avoid runaway climate change, most coal, oil, and gas reserves can never be extracted or burned. This means fossil fuel companies' assets are overvalued, creating a carbon bubble that will burst, affecting investors and pension holders.
In Ireland, we know bubbles can lead to collapse, like in the housing market. So, what must be done? Sean stresses the need for government leadership, proper policies, and debates in the Dial. I asked Sorcha what she thinks is necessary to tackle climate change.
Well, I think it starts with education and awareness. Young people need to inform themselves about what climate change really means, how it's connected to things like energy, food, travel, even fashion. Once they understand that, they can start making different choices. But it's not just about personal actions like recycling or cutting back on meat, though those are important. It's also about collective action. It's about joining groups, campaigning, speaking out, using your voice. We've seen how young people around the world, from Greta Thunberg to climate strikers here in Ireland, have influenced public opinion and forced climate onto the political agenda.
And that brings us back to the bigger picture. Personal choices matter, but they have to be matched with policy and systemic change. That's where pressure on politicians and governments becomes so critical.
Exactly. You can't solve climate change with reusable bags alone. We need big shifts in how we power our homes, how we build our cities, how we grow our food. And these shifts can only happen through political decisions. But those decisions won't come unless people demand them. The climate law we have in Ireland today, imperfect though it may be, exists only because people pushed for it. It shows that change is possible.
So the message is clear. The fight against climate change needs all of us. It needs informed and motivated citizens. It needs political courage. And it needs the voices of young people rising together to demand a better future, not just for themselves, but for the world. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for new episodes of the podcast.